Yikes. Like Granny Weatherwax, right? I ain't dead. I just feel like it. Oh, see, it's a quandary. Either you're up here and you get a nice view, or you're down here and you get to see my cute 11 t-shirt, but also my nest of cables in the background. Life is about choices, and apparently today all of my choices are about where I put the camera. But these people, they have made other choices, and now they're on this list. And just in case we weren't clear, this isn't the good list. This is in fact the bad list. The very, very bad list. I don't indulge all of my ADHD impulses, but when I do, apparently I only indulge the dumb ones because I still need this piece of paper. Okay. Hi guys, it's Leanne and welcome back to another video. I'm going to preface this video by saying that my physical body feels about these books the way that my brain does, and that I am very sick. So if I sound nasally and sinusy, it's because I am. I'm hoping that the makeup is doing something to disguise the actual colour of my skin under it, and I'm also hoping that by wearing the sweetest, cutest outfit, I can somehow offset the salt content of this video just a little bit. Because as you guessed from the title, this is indeed my worst books of 2022 video. 2022 was a bad year. Not just for the books, also for me. It was... I can't even joke about it. It was a very bad year. Okay, 2022 sucked. But I also read more in 2022 than I have for the last 3 years, and that means that although there are a lot of gems, like my best off list is it's beautiful, magnifique. Although there are a lot of books on there, there are also a lot of books on here. And that means that this year you're not just getting my worst of books of 2022, but you're also getting a completely separate video with my DNFs of 2022. Because there were simply too many books that I had feelings about to put on one list. And usually I don't limit my worst books videos. I usually just throw on as many shit books as there were shit books in that year. But this year there are 15. Oh, there are 15 of them. So I've split this into the worst books and the honourable mentions worst books. Let's roll the pastel sleeves up and let's get started. First up, we have got the Outlaws, Scarlett and Browne by Jonathan Stroud. This is both a really bad book and desperately depressing, because if you've been around my channel for any length of time, you will know that Jonathan Stroud's Lockwood & Co series is one of my favourite series of all time. And so when I heard that he was bringing out something else which was Wild West inspired, my little heart went pitter-patter, but I hated it here. The characters are nowhere near as charming as they are in Lockwood & Co, and it meant that I wasn't really rooting for anybody, so by the time that I got to the middle I was like, can this just be over now, please? And it's weird because it does have Jonathan Stroud's kind of like snippy, quick, sarcastic dialogue, but it just felt forced. I didn't feel like it flowed the way that it did in the Lockwood & Co novels. I felt like it was like, pause for joke! And I hate that because I feel manipulated when authors do that. It's like you can see all of the like strings and the cogs in the background, and I just don't like it. And yeah, I couldn't suspend my disbelief for this one. I got to the end of it and I really felt like I'd read a book instead of I'd escaped into a story, and blech. Actually, that's a good summary for this. Just blech. Another honourable mention for me, deeply unfortunately, is House of Hollow by Krystal Sutherland. I felt like the setting of this was just mwah. It felt weirdly gothic while definitely leaning into this like new genre of spore horror, just really heavily populated by like rotting plants and mushrooms and nature kind of being against you. But the actual plot of this for such a short novel just fell completely flat for me in the middle. There was a whole middle section that I just slogged through. Felt like I was clawing through through the pages with my fingernails. A very, very disappointing miss for me, but I would consider picking up another Krystal Sutherland in the future because her writing is beautiful. Next honourable mention is The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. Unfortunately for me, this one took a huge swing and it was a huge mess. And the issue in this one for me is not the plot, which I would have just quite happily kept reading, but actually the emotional range of this book, which was just kind of one note all the way through. Our main character has been through an awful lot before this book actually starts. She has a really big chip on her shoulder and she has like an expectation of people that people are always going to let her down. And while that is not necessarily too far away from what she experiences in the rest of this book, the problem with that is that just like a lot of thrillers, we start with a really angry, really sad, really resentful character and there's no happy moments to counterbalance that. And while I am the queen of reading emotionally distressing books, have we seen the genres that I like, there still has to be some variation of emotion in there or I'm just like, why am I here? My next honourable mention still makes me really, really sad. It is Brood by Jackie Polzin, otherwise known as the chicken book. And to be fair, I'm not like being super funny about that. It is literally a book about chickens and that was why I was so excited about it. But unfortunately this book was not actually about the chickens. And of course, to a certain degree, I knew that that was going to be the case. It's obviously one woman's emotional journey and I was expecting there to be reveals associated with that, and there are. But unfortunately this book, like many other books that I read this year, really suffered from not being marketed exactly right. Because this book is actually a book about miscarriage and infertility and there is nothing anywhere on the blurb or in any of the marketing materials to highlight that that may be a trigger warning. And regardless of how you feel about trigger warnings, whether you feel like they spoil books or whether you, like me, think that they are a pretty necessary part of contemporary fiction and should be included somewhere in the text, this was absolutely not what I wanted, not what I expected, and it did not have the tone that the first chapter and the synopsis promised. And ultimately, although I finished this because I was invested in the characters, the writing is very good. It was not what I was promised in the start, and if it had been another 50 pages longer, I would have DNF'd it. And the last two honourable mentions that I'm going to talk about, I'm just going to talk about together in one little like sticky icky stack, because they are two books from an author that people had been telling me for years that I needed to try, and I did. And I hated it. And that author is, of course, Nicci French. I started out quite early this year actually by reading House of Correction by Nicci French, who are actually a husband and wife writing team, writing under the one name. And actually the structure of it is great. I really enjoyed the way that the inside of the justice system was exposed. I really liked seeing all of the different ways that a layman, somebody who has absolutely no idea how to represent themselves, got access to their evidence and their case file. But the main character was freaking insufferable. She made so many stupid choices. So many stupid, confusing, like pointless choices. And when it came to the portion of her defending herself in court, I almost threw this book across the room so many times. But there was just enough there in the actual writing and the structure of this book that I was like, maybe, just maybe, it's this one main character. I just don't like this character. And so if I go and try more by Nicci French, I might like some of their other books. And so I went on to read Blue Monday, which is the start of a very long series about a psychologist called Frida Klein, who more or less gets roped into helping the police with a case accidentally, and then her association just seems to carry on through the rest of the books. Once again, there was a lot of sort of like logic leaps in this one and conveniences and oh, of course she's being allowed to do that. That makes perfect sense. So Frida is the problem. Frida is the problem. I can't make it any plainer than that. Frida is a really, really unlikable character. She's super standoffish. She keeps everybody at arm's length. She's really quite aggressive and quite shirty with a lot of people for no apparent reason. And I even had a moment of checking myself. I was like, hold on a minute. Are you working from like a preconceived notion here? Are you feeding into this patriarchal idea that women need to be a certain type of way in order to be likable? And I really sat with that for a little while. I really genuinely was like, is Is this just me? I know that so many people love this series. After doing a Goodreads deep dive and speaking to some of you guys who share my opinions, this is not just me. She's just narky for the sake of being narky, and I just don't want it. So yeah, the two Nicci French books on this list, big messes. Did that stop me from trying a third and final one in 2022? No. But that's on the DNF list. My baby boy. Did you read good books in 2022? Are you staying? Okay, cool, great. Okay, on to my actual worst books of 2022 list, and these books are in no particular order. They're not like ranked by the stinkiest or by the date that I read them. They're just noted down as they came off the top of my head and as I refreshed my memory with my Goodreads, so you are welcome for that added layer of chaos to this video. The first book was a hugely anticipated release for me in 2022 and just fell completely flat on its face. And that book is How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie. This one was marketed as kind of having Sweetpea vibes, and we all know that I am a huge devotee of the first book in that series, although not any of the other ones later on in that series. This one promised like a murder mystery with a twist. Our main character is a serial killer and she has killed several people, but she's currently in jail for a murder that she didn't actually commit and has motivation to kind of tell you why she didn't do that one. But my god, that is the only motivation that I believed in the entire book, because the main character is one of the most whiny, privileged, ungrateful characters that I have ever read. Instead of coming off as like slightly unhinged and sarcastically funny and like shining a light on her very privileged world, instead what she came off as was like Serena van der Woodsen from Gossip Girl if she decided to be a serial killer. Like, it's a decent comparison because the two characters have just about as much depth. Also, this is another one where the humour was just reaching. It felt very much like the author was writing and it was like, pause for laughter, but the laughter never came. Next up, speaking about unlikable characters, we have Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. Nothing But Blackened Teeth has a 2.73 rating on Goodreads. I seriously do not think that there are any other books on any of my best off or worst off lists for the year that have that low a Goodreads rating. And it was funny because I obviously bought this right as it came out and read it immediately, and then I watched the ratings go down over time as other people read it and had a similar what did I just read moment. And not like a good what did I just read, but in like a why did you do this? Or for what reason did you do this? Because not only is Nothing But Blackened Teeth nothing to do with the actual premise that it says on the synopsis, yet another one which suffers from being completely misleading in its marketing. This whole book just feels like one massive joke that the author feels like they're participating in with the reader, where like you get to the last page and you close it and it's like the author's going, did you get it? Did you? And I'm like, no. And weirdly, I'm not the only one who felt like that. That comment is actually really prevalent in the Goodreads reviews of it. This could have been a WhatsApp voice note between friends, because this whole book really just hinges on these really unlikable characters having arguments about who had sex with who when. Like, I really can't sugarcoat it. That is the entire thing. And considering this is one of those really short novellas that are only printed in hardcover and cost you like half a kidney to buy, I'm just gonna say skip it. Oh god. Okay, that just leads me on to another short horror novella, which is actually really beloved. This is one of those horror novellas that everybody loses their crap over, and I was eventually like, oh, okay, I know the hype's been here for a really long time and I've avoided it because of the hype for a really long time. But I was forced into a situation where I only had the Kindle app on my phone and I was desperate for like a short and engrossing read, and I finally picked it up and I just wish I hadn't. This one is Confessions by Kanae Minato. It is one of those absolutely cult horror Japanese novellas. If you're into that kind of subgenre of horror, you cannot get away from this one. It is just crammed into your face the minute that you step in the door. It's touted as like a must read. It's not a must read. In fact, for some people it's going to be a must avoid. This entire novella hinges on the weird structure of it. You are thrown in right at the very beginning from the point of view of a teacher who is teaching her last day in this high school, and she is addressing her last class. That would normally be a given dynamic which just absolutely draws me in and hooks me, but instead I was just bored. The main character's point of view is dry as dirt. She kept telling me that she was having these big emotions and these big horrible things had happened to her, and there was just zero of that in her dialogue. And because you only have her dialogue, there's just nowhere else to go. But even if you take the writing and the structure of it aside, even if you take yourself out of that for a minute, this entire plot hinges on a really horrible, deeply homophobic, deeply misinformed premise. I'm going to put a spoiler warning right here for this, so if this is a book that you are still interested in reading and you don't want any spoilers, you can either mute me or you can skip to the end of this section. The entire plot of this novel hangs on the fact that the main character's husband was infected with HIV, which eventually progressed to AIDS and he died. And she's taking revenge for the death of her daughter. Don't ask it. It took a long time to get there for such a short book, which is unrelated to her husband's death, on these kids by infecting them with HIV in the milk that they drink. And so, as well as there being just so many different sets of mental gymnastics needed to get to the reason why she's doing this really dumb thing, there is also the fact that the information on AIDS and HIV in this book is not outdated, it's just plain wrong. It just perpetrates so many of the erroneous stereotypes that exist out there about AIDS and HIV that I'm just like, I don't know how this book actually got off the ground in the first place. And one of the things that the stands of this book have consistently said to me since I reviewed this originally is that, well, in Japanese culture, AIDS and HIV is still a really taboo thing. While that is still true, this does not negate the criticism that we are now in 2023 and still loving and holding on to and endlessly talking about a book which perpetuates these harmful stereotypes is screwed up. I mean, do we really have to get back into the debate about how just because a book is a classic of the genre does not mean that we still have to hold on to it and promote it? Do we still really have to have that discussion in 2023? So in conclusion, if you skip the spoiler portion of this, I hated this book and I do not recommend. Speaking of things I just don't ever want to see in my fiction again, let's talk about False Witness by Karin Slaughter. I think this might be my official breakup note with Karin Slaughter, which I am really, really disappointed about. The Good Daughter and Pretty Girls are two of my favourite thriller books ever to ever exist, and I will forever tell people about them and say that I love them. But I am really starting to realise that beginning with Pieces of Her and ending in this one, for me, Karin Slaughter's fiction has gone completely off the rails in a direction that I am just not into. Karin Slaughter was actually writing this book as the first set of lockdowns happened, and so she actually pulled it and rewrote the entire book to include the pepperoni. But because she was writing it mid-pepperoni when it was at its spiciest, she was including every single detail. So reading this is like reading a history of all of the lockdowns and everything that happened, whilst being interspersed with a Karin Slaughter plot, except that this plot, which could have been really, really good, took a massive backseat to the other stuff. And while I acknowledge that there are going to be a slew of books published in the next couple of years which include the pepperoni as something that has happened, I am only interested in picking up those books that include it as like a background fact, because I realised reading this that I do not ever want to relive it in any kind of detail. And then the actual plot itself, which again included two sisters, which I was so excited for, was just bad. Just really convenient. There were a lot of coincidences in this one too, where I was just like, that is not something that I have come to expect in Karin Slaughter novels. They're usually so intricately plotted with so many different layers that I was like, really? I can't believe we're breaking up. Next up, on a much less amusing note, I have If I Don't Make It, I Love You by Amy Archer and Loren Kleinman. This is a non-fiction book which looks at the history of school shootings in the US from the most recent one as the book was published all the way back to the first recorded one. It is told through a lot of different types of submissions from both survivors of school shootings and from family members of victims of school shootings and classmates and teachers and other people who were present on campuses at the time. And it does so by having an introduction before each one of these chapters written by the two editors about their experiences of pulling together this book and what they think that we can learn from the stories in this book. And frankly, that was the issue. This book had a lot going for it. It's really experimental in that it is not just straight up written testimonies from the survivors and their families, etc. It is also poetry, it's graphic novels, it's transcribed interviews, it's transcribed speeches that people have given. And I found that really interesting because as somebody who has read and consumed a lot of media and opinion pieces on school shootings, there were some sort of like points of view in here that I had never considered before. There were ways of conveying the accounts that were just really, really interesting. However, I felt like those accounts should have been the shining pieces of this book, and instead they were massively, massively overshadowed by these huge introductory pieces by the editors that was all about how they felt, how they had trauma about transcribing these interviews, because of course they were stepping into somebody else's worst day of their life constantly again and again and again. And so they talk a lot about how they're like, oh, you take this one because I just can't, like I'm at my limit. So the same kinds of recurring themes again and again when they interviewed these victims and their families, and it just was so irritating because it kept being about them. And while I completely understand that that experience would have been hugely overwhelming, if you are choosing to take that on as a task, then you are choosing to center the victims instead of yourself, and it very much did not feel like that was what was going on, and it hugely pulled me away from actually focusing on the point of each of these chapters. And the other thing that is so irritating about this, about a book that is so incredibly important, is that there were so many mistakes. There were double words, there were typos, there was actual paragraphs that were like out of alignment. There were just blatant mistakes where one word had been used instead of another, and not in like the victims' accounts where it was just like oh, they misspoke in the moment but we're actually using their true words here, but in like the actual pieces which like put it all together in the introductions to those sections. It was awful. It felt like reading the very first uncorrected draft of this before it got to publication stage, and I don't understand how it got that far. And while I'm here, I may as well talk about the other non-fiction slash memoir-y book that's on this list, and that is On Agoraphobia by Caveney. I actually haven't talked about this book anywhere online since I finished it because I'm still so angry about it. Agoraphobia is something that is very close to my heart. I was agoraphobic as a teen and spent more than a year in the walls of my parents' house without physically being able to leave. And again, after the pepperoni, when we were all forced to stay inside for such a long period of time, myself and lovely spouse Harry, maybe longer than some people because of our chronic illnesses, agoraphobia once again became something that was really like cycling around in my head, something I was thinking about. It is now something that a lot of people are unfortunately experiencing on the back of the pepperoni because they are just re-entering society, and it's very scary. And so when I saw that this book had been published, I was like, oh my god, I haven't seen anything recently at all be published on this subject. I will pick it up. I even asked the publishers for a review copy. Thank you very much, guys, even though I am kind of slating it here. It was nice of you to send it through. But instead of getting a memoir of agoraphobia that I could like hold up against my own experience and be like, oh yeah, I really recognise that, or oh, that's something that I had never thought of before, or oh wow, that's put really, really well, I wish that I had the words to explain my feelings like that, I got an entire memoir of mansplaining vignettes. This book is split up into these tiny, tiny little paragraphs, and each of them are kind of very loosely piecing together Graham's own experience with agoraphobia and how he sees the world. But the problem is he just can't stay on topic. In giving you his experience with agoraphobia, he veers into quite a lot of other side topics, and he tells you what he thinks about them in some detail. And that's the interesting thing. I felt like agoraphobia was a side note. I felt like it was a way to get his opinions about how the world works and how it's not set up for certain types of people, namely him. And by tying it back to Agoraphobia, all of these little vignettes were kind of lent some kind of legitimacy because they were all actually about one topic, and the topic they were about was Graham. I kept reading because I was like, surely at some point we will move past this and get, oh no, we're not moving past it. No, oh, we're at the end. That was what it was. Okay. And I only finished it because it was so short. Again, if it had been another 100 pages, it would have left, possibly via a window. The next one I actually did yeet. I did throw it across the room, and actually I think in the wrap up that I did featuring it, I threw it away at the end. And that is Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. Everybody and their dog wanted me to read this. I picked it up for one of my Patreon readathons, and as soon as I mentioned it on the internet, everybody went nuts. This one is of course the basis for Practical Magic the film, which is a film that I absolutely adore. But it turns out that you are either in the camp of loving the book or loving the film, and kind of nothing in between. I mean, there are a few outliers, there are a few people in that no man's land, but not very many of them. It turns out that I am very definitely on the side of loving the film and not understanding the entire point of the book. I still, looking back at it, do not know how they got so much charm and whimsy and packed it all in the film from this book, because it's not here. Like, it doesn't live here. So where did it come from? Throughout the entire reading experience of this one, I kind of genuinely wondered if I was reading a different book from everybody else. Alice Hoffman has a really strange style of writing wherein it's like she assumes that there should be nostalgia there, that you should already have nostalgia for this book that you have not read before. And I would think that it was because, oh well, the movie and it's based, but no, the movie came after the book, so this is just coming from the book. It's like she's telling me that I should have this deep feeling for these orphans that she introduces when I've only just met them. The aunts feature hardly at all in this book, and the sisters are just so skeptical of them and of their magic and of what they do, and so disapproving of them that it almost gives you the impression as the reader that they are kind of charlatans and they're not actually as powerful as they are in the movie and as they're later on meant to be in the book. And that standoffishness, that hatred of magic and hatred of any of the whimsy that the aunts have in their home and the way that they live from both of the sisters in this just permeates the rest of this, and it makes the whole thing feel really bitter. Add to that the fact that in the book Gillian and Sally really seem to hate each other all the time. Like, in the movie it was really easy to understand that they were just very different people, but they dearly loved each other and they wanted to be there for each other. They just, their lifestyles didn't gel, whereas in this one it's just straight up, nah, we hate each other, we hate the choices that the other person has made. And so when the sisters get together at the end, when they're thrown back together through, you know, plotty circumstance, there ends up being a whole bit where Sally's basically like, get away from my children, what are you doing, you're corrupting my kids. And I'm just like, ooh, that's a change in tone. That's the change in tone from the movie. And on top of all of that, there's a weird tone in this book whereby it's like a woman is not complete unless she has a man. Unless she has like the devoted love of a man, a woman just can't be happy. Where like love is the point of existing, love is the point of doing anything, but it has to be that kind of relationship love. No other forms of love are acceptable, no other forms of love will do. And weirdly, this one actually influenced one of my goals in 2023, which you'll hear about later on, which has basically just to do with trusting my gut when people tell me, you love this book. 2022 proved that that was not always the case. In fact, that was not often the case. As proved by my second to last book on this list. This is, without any further ado, Tender as the Flesh. And it was trash. This is another one of those books that I have been told by so many people across so many years is just like the most groundbreaking book that they have ever read. This book is touted to be at its heart about cannibalism, but it isn't really. It's about a sad main character who has a real issue in his life with connecting with anybody else. It's about his depressing life and how it was depressing before the events in this world that means that now we only eat human meat, and how it continues to be depressing even now. And while I am not against reading books that are sad, as we have established earlier on in this video, I do not like to read books that are just one note sad. There has to be something else, there has to be some other kind of emotion in it, but this one just didn't find any. But apart from that, apart from the one note emotions and the just kind of it was fine writing, like the writing was there and it was writing, I feel like one of the chief problems with this book is that it is a horror novel for people who want to be horrified but don't want to read horror as a genre. It's the literary fiction equivalent of body horror, just in a more palatable, pardon the pun, format. It's like the book is going, look, I make worthwhile comments on how bad society is, so it's okay for you to read this really disgusting horror. Except it's not really disgusting. It's just endless descriptions in a really, really mediocre tone of body farming. And I feel like it's been done 100 times better by actual books in the actual horror genre, including all of the societal commentary and all of the people are inherently bad in their core, but with a better plot and pacey action and better dialogue. Typical that my battery died after that one. The literary fiction stands have infiltrated my technology. But finally, we are at what I genuinely do think is my worst book of the year. I kept it to the end for a reason. I hate it so much. Another horror novella. And worse than that, it's a haunted house horror novella. The book that I am talking about is, of course, Come Closer by Sarah Gran. This took some of my booktube circles by absolute storm. This little novella does some of the things that I hate the most in horror all in one place. There are endless dream sequences and it's so tiny, but there are so many dream sequences packed in, and they are all dream sequences which are very like abstract. There's a beach and the water's all made of blood. I mean, you don't need to be Freud or an astrology girly who likes to interpret dreams to get what the author is cuffing you around the freaking head with here. Everything is just so on the nose and to the point. There's no mystery whatsoever. It really is just as simple as, yeah, so her apartment is haunted and now she's being possessed. And as somebody who reads more than the average amount of haunted house novels, I also kind of end up with more than the average amount of possession stories. And if I had a possession bingo board to tick off, this tiny little novella would have hit the bingos around and around and around and around. There's those moments where she does things and she feels like somebody else is piloting her body, but secretly she kind of enjoys them. There's her physical appearance slowly degrading so she stops washing. There's the search for a cure, which mysteriously takes us to one of only 2 people in this entire novella who are definitely not white, and so are therefore there for the author's window decoration. Like, she literally goes for a voodoo cure, which includes all of the trappings of what Hollywood have given to voodoo. And the only other non-white person in this is somebody who owns a newsstand and is very clearly pigeonholed into owning a newsstand because it's clearly an unskilled job and it's the only one they can get. And they're literally just there for the author to kill off and use as a plot point and move on. And yet somehow, despite how short this whole novella is, that character still also somehow manages to fulfill the trope of the happy non-white person who's really sweet to the main character and gets killed off because of it. And then, of course, the end of this novella, the author had to offer up some kind of twist to make the whole thing worthwhile. But the twist is simply that she is one of many other possessed people in the world who's walking about with a demon inside her. And I'm like, didn't that whole plotline happen on Supernatural? Honestly, if there's one book on this list that I genuinely want to set on fire, it's that one. So here we are for another year at the end of my worst books of 2022 list. Did the sweetness of 11 and her Eggo waffles in any way offset the salt content for you? I mean, hopefully not, because that's why you're here, let's all be honest. Yeah, 15 out of 80 something books have ended up on this list. And in the trash heap where they belong. If you have made it to the end of this list, then please leave me the salt emoji down below in the comments. And as always, this is my favourite time of the year to say this. Please tell me down below what your worst books of the year were, and also tell me whether you agreed or disagreed with the books that are on my list, because we love opinions here. If you are new here and the salt content in this video has cleared your skin, then please consider hitting that subscribe button below. And if you have enjoyed this video, then please hit the thumbs up, because it really does help my channel. And I will see you all very, very soon, guys, with more books that I didn't like and then some books that I really did. Bye!